First question we start out with is tell me a little bit about Parent Hero, what you guys do, why it's awesome. What was the insight that kind of brought you to this idea?
Yeah, for sure. So, Parent Hero is on a mission to help parents raise happy and healthy kids. So, we're building a single place where parents can get answers to questions, access care, access community, and use tools that's essentially make family life easier. We know that if we do it right, almost every parent in the world is going to be using this technology. And that's something that was extremely impactful. And when we started Parent Hero, there were two things that were really important. The first was family structures are much more diverse now than they ever were. And tech native people are starting to become parents. And that's changing the way people approach parenting as a whole. The second was that technology is deeply impacting the lives of our children and it's changing the future of the world that they're going to live in. And it just became clear that our current system wasn't built to support these changes. So we felt like there was a really important gap that needed to be filled. And it was kind of confusing to us why, there wasn't a single place to get family support yet, or why someone wasn't doing this before. But as we went through the journey, we found many reasons why.
Can you talk to me a little bit about your story, kind of like what your career looked like before starting Parent Hero?
Yeah. So since I was a kid, I was always really influenced in the power of education. My parents, they're both immigrant teachers, but they're both very different people. So I had a pretty difficult childhood. We immigrated to the lowest income area in Canada called Jane and Finch. And my dad was physically and emotionally abusive. And my mom was a very kind and empathetic person. So I'd always think about how I could better support my mom and how I could be a better father in the future. And my parents, because they were both teachers, they were trying to make ends meet. And so we had a tutoring practice at school or at home. And after school, my mom would tutor kids. And so after I was identified gifted in grade 3, I realized, hey, I could teach some of these kids. I can get involved in support. And so when I was in grade 5, I started tutoring kids and had a chance to tutor kids for over 10 years. And a lot of them came from very different backgrounds. Some of them had parents that were working in a factory or driving taxi, but they had one thing in common, which was they were involved parents and they wanted what was best for their kids. And that's really why they came to a new country, is for a better life for their kids. And so I really enjoyed seeing the impact that that had on the lives of the kids that we were able to tutor. And some of those kids are now engineers. And it was just deeply fulfilling to me how that would change the trajectory of their family and like their generation. And so after business school, I worked in consulting for a couple of years. I started building an e-commerce store and I co-founded like a last mile logistics company. So we are helping e-commerce stores deliver same day. And I learned a lot from the experience about building a startup. But after I left that, I started
I
thinking
want to I
deeply
actually
about.
want to jump into those experiences first before we get into Parent Hero. So you started at consulting. Was there a reason why you decided to jump into consulting first? Was entrepreneurship something that you wanted to do before, or is this kind of like, yeah? Talk to me a little bit about the decision making at that point.
Yeah, I think at first, as an immigrant child, like as a child of like two parents, they just immigrated to this country and are trying to make ends meet. I just wanted to support my family's financial security. I
Yeah.
think as many of us do. And my parents are both teachers, so they don't make too much. And they made a lot of sacrifices for us. So giving back to them was my main motivator to start a company and like join consulting. And when I joined consulting, I knew that I wanted to eventually start something. And it was the best place as a playground, as a learning ground to see what kind of functions are in companies, the ways that technology was changing the world, and then also like speak to executives and get that practice. So I felt like it was a good stepping stone, but I realized that my initial motivator was just trying to make some financial security to give back to my parents. But after my first startup experience, I realized that you could build something really impactful and the financial value is essentially a byproduct of the value that you add to the world. And that's when I started focusing more on Parent Hero.
What made you decide to take the kind of the startup path? Was it, something came up in the first place that or like was there some idea that you had to do that last mile logistic company? Or was this kind of like, hey, I just want to be a startup founder and just try something?
I think as a child, I always wondered why there was such a disparity between the value that my parents added and the value that they were able to capture.
Yep.
Because I realized that like teachers are just adding so much value to the lives of these kids, but they're severely undervalued in society. And then I saw there's a ton of businesses that make a lot of money, but then some of them are not even run correctly.
Yeah.
So the value that they're adding is not as impactful, and they're a lot of them have a lot of gaps in the way they're being run. So I just always felt like there was a better way to do things, and I think that's something that always stuck with me as why I wanted to eventually start a business, because I realized that there was a lot of value to be had there, and I also realized that there was a lot of gaps in the way that people were doing things.
Makes sense. Talk to me now about the founding story of Parent Hero. Like, take me from the beginning. Was there like a specific moment you were like, oh, I have this idea and I want to go after it? Was it kind of percolating? Did you like go research a bunch of ideas because you wanted to start another company? Like, talk me through that process of, you know, getting started with this.
Yeah, so it started with the problem. I started with the fact that we realized that the lives of parents are just getting harder, and the future that we're bringing our children into is becoming more uncertain.
Was this something that you were looking for? Or was it just like you were talking to somebody and you kind of figured that out? How did that, where did that realization come from?
Yeah, so after I left my last startup, I really started thinking about why do we build companies in the first place? And why do we even start a business? Is it for financial gain? Is it because we want to actually give back to the world? And if it is for financial gain, why are we seeking financial gain in the first place? And I really unraveled a lot of those existential questions. I went deep into meditation and did a lot of Vipassana. I think it's a very impactful meditation, and it kind of unraveled a lot of my childhood and realized that a lot of what I was pursuing or things that were blocking me were things that had come through indoctrinations of some sort, whether it was societal or in my childhood. And so unraveling those things, I realized the impact of having a foundational level experience with really helping children and parents. And I just realized the impact, the ripple effect, the butterfly effect, if you will, that it could have on the world. And that once I saw that and I realized the problems that parents were facing in the world that we live in today, it just became undeniable that I just had to build in this space.
So what brought you to some conviction around like the solution that you guys are currently working on or started working on?
Yeah, I think we realized like it's really hard to do what we're doing. Like the actual idea of building a single place for parents to get support, it's easier said than done. And delivering on that promise is really what we hyper focused on. We are really obsessed with just understanding the problems of parents and kids. I think my childhood experiences and just being around my parents who are teachers, tutoring for so many years, and also speaking to my brother and my sister-in-law who are both doctors very frequently, and just understanding the challenges that clinicians face when they speak to families has given us a lot of edge on how we really solve those problems. And the fact that we're really willing to roll up our sleeves and go deep on really solving long tail issues, I think is what makes us really unique. So it's really just a combination of like how smart the people are on the team in what they do. Like we have incredible engineers, incredible designer, and also just their willingness to do anything it takes to solve this problem.
So you had a problem, you're like, all right, we identified a problem. What were the steps of actually forming this into a product or a company? What did you guys do in those first early days? How did you build the team? How did you build the product? How did you realize like, hey, someone actually gives a shit about the solution that we're actually building?
Yeah, so we spoke to hundreds, if not thousands, of parents. I spoke to them personally and just had sit downs at their houses in many cases or at a coffee shop, and just like really dug deep on the problems they were facing and understood the different journeys that parenting could take. And once we really understood that, we realized that the ways that parents were solving this was right now very reactive. They have an issue and then they search for a solution to that issue. And the answer that they find is usually through a book, or it's through Google, or it's through sometimes Reddit forums or other forums or Facebook groups. And the resources are very unreliable and they're very disparate. And so parents spend a lot of time trying to find answers reactively. And we realize there's definitely a reason for parents to get things more proactively and for us to curate those things for them to understand what they need to know before they actually need to know it so that they can get ahead of these things with their family and with their kids. And so that's where the inception of the idea was, and just understanding that at the core of it all is answering the questions that parents have and giving them the answers before they need to know them. And I think that was the foundation. So we started building a lot of content. And then what we realized was when parents are actually reading this content, they have different intents. So they may actually want to purchase something that is the best thing for their kid, and they don't know what that thing is, whether it's like a stroller or a baby monitor. But they may also need care, right? So when they read an article that's written by a doctor, reviewed by a doctor, which all of our content is, they actually may realize that now I need to see a care provider about this. And so then we realized, okay, we need to build something that allows them to see a care provider as well. So we realized healthcare is a natural extension to what we're doing. And then we also realized that parenting is a very lonely journey. And building a community and building your village is like something that parents really deeply care about and is impactful to their mental health. And so we realized community was a natural part of what we're building. And that's kind of how our product shaped up to be what it is.
So you mentioned that you are a bootstrap founder, right? You bootstrapped the company. Can you talk to me a little bit
That's right.
about that decision? That's a kind of different decision that a lot of people take. Why did you decide to take that route?
Yeah. So in 2021, when the market was pretty frothy, we talked to, I'd say, about 40 or so VCs. And there was definitely some interest in what we're building. I think the challenge for us was finding the right partner, because finding the right partner to us means everything. It's a long term journey, and someone who really understands the problem we're trying to solve and the deep passion that we have behind our life's work is something that was really important to us. And I didn't find that we were finding that at the time. I think also we were really early. Like we hadn't fully built out the product at that time. And a lot of what we have today has been fleshed out over the past few years in a very meticulous and slow way that sometimes venture doesn't allow for. And so we think that's allowed us to be more careful about how we're building something that is really going to impact people's lives in a meaningful way. And so that's why we decided to hold off on venture funding and talking to VCs, because we really wanted to build out the product, and we wanted to come at working with partnerships from a financial perspective in a thoughtful way where we could bring in partners who also understand the mission that we're going after.
And so, what have been the pros and cons, or the ups and downs from kind of being bootstrapped? I imagine that you have to be a little bit more careful with hiring and other things. Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
I think definitely there's some cons to bootstrapping, which obviously mean you can't grow as fast and all of those things. But there's a lot of pros as well. I think the pros are that you can do what's right for your customer at all times, as opposed to focus on growth. And in the early days, that's really important. I think also you can hire in a more meticulous way. Hiring the right people is extremely valuable to an early stage company. I definitely made some hires that I learned from, but I think that making sure that you make those decisions quickly and hire the right people is something that you can do better as a bootstrapped company, because oftentimes when you raise a bunch of money, there's a tendency to want to go and hire a bunch of people. And sometimes those hiring decisions can be made hastily and not the best decisions. So I think it allows you to be more thoughtful about the team you're building. It allows you to be more thoughtful about the product you're building. And it allows you to really be patient about understanding when taking capital is really going to lead to an inflection point and growth in your company. And so I think bootstrapping is definitely something I would recommend to founders who are trying to decide whether they want to raise money or not, especially in a market where capital is constrained and talking to investors could waste a lot of time that you could be spending building product. And I think that once you feel like you have a really strong product and you have some really good customer feedback, and there's a real burning need to hire some people that you've been waiting to hire for a long time, at that point, you might want to start thinking about taking in some capital.
You mentioned the inflection points. Like, in your mind, what were the inflection points with the company, and like, what led up to them? What were kind of those breakthroughs that you found?
Yeah. So one really big inflection point, we're currently in private beta, so there's a wait list. And we one really awesome inflection point that we hit recently was just seeing repeat usage. So just seeing how many people are coming back on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and on a monthly basis to either view content or use some of the tools and automations that we've built that can make family life easier. And I think when we realized that there's a real willingness to use the product, we knew that the willingness to pay would follow. And then we sent out a form to a bunch of those beta users to put in their credit card to pre order. And we had a really great response with that. Over 80% of them actually ended up putting in their credit card information. And so that's when we
That's
realized
awesome.
that there's a real willingness to pay from the cohort that we've been working with. And I think that was the main inflection point when we realized our product is ready for other people.
That's awesome. What do you feel like you've learned in this journey so far? Like, what have you learned? What are the ups and downs?
Yeah, I think what I've learned is before you build a company, try to understand yourself and know yourself. It will give you a lot of direction in what you're trying to build. Whether you're building a company or joining a company, I think we often run in directions really fast without calibrating the direction in which we're running. And we just tend to just run at life. But I find that calibrating things and understanding really where you're going and why you're doing it can really be meaningful and impactful and can give you the resilience that you need. So that's one thing that I really learned is building a company is really just a reflection of the people inside it. And if everybody inside the company is learning and growing and deeply passionate about what they're working on, inherently the company will reflect that.
That's awesome. We have a few minutes left. Anything else you want to talk about, either your company, what you guys are doing, anything else that like you'd like to kind of put out there?
Yeah, we're definitely building a lot of really awesome stuff here. And anyone that's really interested in what we're doing, I would really appreciate them reaching out. They can email me at Karan@ParentHero.com. And yeah, we'd love to just talk to people who are passionate about what we're working on, whether they're people that want to work with us or they're investors. We're just always looking to meet people that have aligned interests. So that's really all I'd want to say.